it's something that we need to discuss, but I didn't think it was, going to be all that in a bag of chips. But hey, apparently Satan's thinking otherwise, because Lord help me, we've had so much opposition in getting on tonight. Okay, I am now recording. Ooh, I just realized I just recorded that. Ooh, what a great intro, people. Tonight I have a few thoughts. I have a few thoughts that that I hope will help be able to when going through different aspects of relationships or whatever, right? So tonight's topic, of those top five, right? Of those top five things that we need to talk about when you are dating or when you're entering a relationship or whatever, the things you need to kind of agree on or compromise or whatever on, right? So we talked religion a couple of weeks ago. We talked, energy and emotional connections and vampires last week, right? So tonight I want to talk about more the parenting and, if we can have enough time, work in the money aspect of it. In working with a lot of single adults that I get to do, which I'm very blessed, I have great friends with the single adults. I hear a lot of people talk about parenting issues, whether it's co-parenting with a former spouse, whether it's concerns about blending a family in the future, adult children, parenting, about, there's just so many different aspects to single parenting. I actually wrote a book a few years ago, probably closer to 15 years ago now. And at the time when I first wrote it, I was still married when I first started it anyway. And it was geared towards stay-at-home moms, because it was back in the era of women, and sadly it still happens, for women who are stay-at-home moms feel like they're not contributing to the family or to the household. I think that's one of Satan's biggest tools, because to me there's no greater contribution than, how you raise a child, right? And that's my opinion. People can disagree or whatever. And I have nothing against working moms. I think working moms are fabulous people. They actually have more on them than stay-at-home moms do, in my opinion, because a lot of times they still got to, go to work and still take care of things at home. A lot of those expectations are there. But then after I was starting that book, I became single, within a couple of years later. So then I kind of revamped it a little bit to Single Parenting 101. And there's a lot to single parenting that people don't really think about, they don't really consider, they don't really know until you've experienced it. And one thing in particular for me is time. The time that we put into our kids. Now, when I became a single mom 12 years ago, again, I realized at the time that my kids not only lost their father, they lost me as they knew me. So it's a stay-at-home mom kind of thing. Whereas I still managed to be flexible with being home and, having more time with them and whatever, in the way that I worked my life and my path, if you will, to be able to be home with them. It doesn't really matter. It just matters more the feeling that's in the home while you do have time with them. I also learned early on, thankfully, I have really great sons that have no problem telling me how they feel about things. But I want to come on to that when you're raising teenagers. But thankfully, we have mutual respect thing going on, and that helped a lot. But they were able, I remember within the first year or something, I was always on the go. Either working, I'd get involved with stuff, I'd volunteer for things. I was always busy, 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 busy. I remember on the phone one time trying to deal with my 15-year-old son. He was my oldest at the time. Maybe he was 16 by then. Either way, fun age. And he was there trying to deal with younger siblings, and I was trying to help situation on the phone. And he made a comment to me. He says, "Mom, no." And I realized then that they needed me to be home more than I needed to be busy. Hola. So realizing that I was, busy trying to mask feelings and trying to, cover up what hurt, right? But knowing that my kids needed that time with me and needed to be able to have a mom. Even though they lost me as they knew me as a stay-at-home mom, they still needed a mom. They still needed a parent. And so that's always important. And then also when it comes to the dealing with a former spouse, if you are in a divorce situation, dealing with a former spouse is something where it does contribute to the self-esteem of the children. When you talk in a negative way or a positive way about their former spouse, or about your former spouse, about their other parent, because their self-esteem is still going to be affected, if you will, by things you say, how you treat the other parent, and that type of thing. I've seen this a lot with kids that where the mom has a lot of influence on their children, and she's talking negatively about their father. Kids need a father. That is huge. And, I've had to raise my kids fatherless, and I did not have a choice in that. But they have felt the loss, and so have I, and not having a dad in their life. And no matter how you feel about your spouse, as long as there's no abuse or anything, any form of neglect or whatever in there, they need the other parent. Bottom line, they need the other parent. But anytime you're talking negatively about the other parent, just know that they're going to internalize it, because kids by nature are self-centered, if you will, like everything centers around them. So they're going to think, oh, well, if she thinks that about him and he's my father, then that must mean I am that way too. And so we have to keep that in mind and how we parent kids. Now, this is just in when you've still got kids at home or whatever, but even as adult children, you need to be mindful of that. So I decided in my situation that I just wouldn't talk about their father. I wasn't going to say anything negative about him. And even now, we've had conversations, this is 12 later, conversations where, sorry, now I've got kids in the background. See if I can go down now. But where we've had conversations remembering good things about their father. And that has been very helpful for them. It's been very enlightening for them. And they've appreciated that, being able to know that, oh, there were good things about a man that, did what he did, kind of thing, right? So, and then in dealing with adult children, there's a whole realm of issues with that one, or it can be. Either way, keeping a close relationship with them is like the most important thing. And being able to stay close to them. All my kids are grown. And my youngest is 19. He's in Brazil on a mission. My oldest is 28. I've got all of them in between that, So, so as when and having adult children, what I have found is we've got to set up a time where we do connect, where there's still that closeness, where there's still that family bond, if you will. Because otherwise, it's very easy to get busy and to not have them around, or whatever. Especially like I've got a son that lives in Idaho. I've got another one that lives 4 hours away, and so we don't connect with her as often. So it just helps us being able to do that regularly. But when it comes to relationships, it is something where you do need to discuss different aspects of parenting. And I have found that when you agree on parenting, that's pretty significant, and that can be helpful. So I want to open this up, and let's just kind of talk about how parenting is, how it has affected you, how you feel like parenting plays a part in your life as a single parent, or how you feel like you want to introduce them, or just whatever with the situation. Okay. So I'm going to mute for just a minute, and I'm going to try to reposition again, and then you guys start talking, and I'll be listening.
Well, I can start. I think for me, the hardest challenge with, co-parenting with a former spouse is that, there's two homes with two sets of rules, two sets of, ways that things are done, and it creates challenges. And, even if you're really good at coordinating with your former spouse, my ex and I, we coordinate on a lot of kid things, and, doctor's appointments and homework and all sorts of, activities, all that kind of thing. But even then, there still are different expectations and rules at, the different houses, and, things are a little rowdier at my house because I'm the fun dad and, play with them and all that. But at the same time, I make them go to church and do gospel-centered activities, like scriptures and say prayers at meal times and things like that. And so it definitely is the biggest challenge for me is that there's that inconsistency. Like, no matter how consistent you are at your own home, it's never going to be the same at both homes. So I think that's the biggest challenge for me. And I'll leave that there. I've got some comments on, how parenting plays a role in dating and things like that. But as far as, parenting as a single parent and dealing with, the other parent, that's kind of what I wanted to bring up.
From her. Hey. Seeing.
What was that? All right. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate those comments. And I appreciate you bringing up the co-parenting aspect. And yeah, there are different rules at different homes, and that can be a pain. But as long as you stay consistent where you're at in your home, then, and they know the rules and those are clear, then you should be good either way on that one. you know, because then they'll know, okay, at mom's house, this is the way it is, and then at dad's house, this is the way it is. When it comes to blending families or blending kids, that could be a whole different ballgame, right? But just different aspects to what it is that you feel like is important or things that you feel like need to happen. So when you're dating and that topic comes up, or have you dated and that topic comes up, then what do you do and how do you bring that up?
Paula, I think that we've been talking about how we have personal standards when we are dating. I think we have to share our standards for how we want our children raised, and we have to be clear on what our expectations are with our kids so that we can share those expectations with the person that we're dating. And I think we have to be mindful, even if our kids are all grown, like you were talking about before, we still have to have that guideline. Like, my kids are grown and gone, but whoever is in my life has got to accept the fact that I'm very close with my kids. We talk several times a week, and we, Skype a couple of times on the weekends, and whomever I'm with has got to be prepared to kind of accept that into their life as well, because I'm not willing to give up that relationship with my kids, even though they're grown and on their own. So I think it's knowing what our standards are for our relationship with our kids, whether they're at home or not, and you have to stick to that, and you have to find that common ground with your person that you're dating or whatever. And when that lines up, then that person's right for you. But if it doesn't line up, you're never going to change their opinion on it, I don't think, unless you can really do some, crazy compromising, which it might be uncomfortable if they're too far off. I think there has to be, baseline similarities.
True. And then also, I think in Alaska, also if parenting, money comes into play, because a lot of times, at least in my experience anyway, parenting and money have been similar in topic. Like, if you're talking about one, you're going to talk about the other, because different kids may be involved with different activities or different events, or maybe you have different traditions or different things you do as a family or whatever. And then that can also come into play with money. So then that will affect finances. So that can also be something that you'll need to talk about. I mean, you'll definitely need to go more in depth with the money talk. But when it comes to talking about parenting per se, that is something that also, you can talk about that as well. Oh, so.
And one question I have is about when I was a stepmom, before I joined the church and everything. My husband and I, when I was married, I'm a widow now, but his daughters did not want his dad to remarry. They were very, so it was a struggle. I mean, because they were teenagers, and teenage girls love their daddies, and they want them. I mean, it's hard enough when you're their mom, but when you're the stepmom, it's really hard. So I'm always, I mean, it was pretty hard. I mean, to figure out, I was trying to be supportive of him. I realized I wasn't their mother, but I was their parent at my house. I was also the parent. And sometimes you have to kind of figure out how that's going to work too, because if my husband and I had very different concepts of how to direct children. And so that became, so getting a united front and whatever was really, really tricky for me. So, and they do try to, break him up. That's what their teenagers do. I mean, they're hard on everybody. And I had one that I had, she moved in, we got married, and 3 weeks later they sent the 14-year-old to come live with us. So it was not much of a change over time. And so sometimes I wish, I had better questions to ask about that as getting into a family that, and a blended would even be harder, I think.
So that's awesome. I appreciate the fact that you've even had that experience. That's great. So what are some questions that you would recommend people ask?
I guess the really good question would be, what is your person you're dating goal for the children is really important for you to understand, because and then whether or not they're going to support you. Even, I mean, parents, I know, make mistakes. The kids play one against the parents all the time, but as a step parent, it's really, really exasperated. And so how are we going to handle when they're playing us against each other, and still propose a united front without creating all kinds of havoc and drama. Those are the two I can think of, but any other ideas would be great too.
Yeah. So, yeah. I know my older son married a woman with, at the time he was 11-year-old son. He's now 12. And it is entertaining to me to a degree how he plays them against each other. Well, not only that, but his mom is, or my daughter-in-law is from Brazil. So her native language is Portuguese. My son does not speak any Portuguese. So we have learned when Enzo's trying to get his mom to do something that TJ won't let him do, he'll start talking to her in Portuguese, and we can tell by the tone of his voice what he's trying to do. So that has been, I mean, even I've been able to, and I don't speak a lick of Portuguese, but it's been interesting to me to go to Ben and go, Enzo, are you trying to get your mom to let you have cake after TJ just said, no cake because you didn't eat dinner kind of thing? And he's like, is there really something just, and thankfully it was short-lived because they were on the same page with how to parent, even though there's that language barrier. They're at least on the same page with how to parent. So, so that has been helpful. But it's been something how they do. They totally do play each other. His father passed away, so it's just TJ and Yenny, but still, it's something. And now they're about to have another baby, or have a baby. So it's been interesting, the dynamics of that. So when it comes to blending a family, what are some questions that you guys think that need to be asked? What are some things we need to talk about?
I have a thought on that.
Yeah.
Since I was married and divorced 20,000 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Just
1,000, Fred, not thousands.
Okay. The last century. One of the things I've learned is observation. You have to observe what's going on. And I promise you, as Mary said, they're going to do everything they can. Some of them will try to really come between you, and they'll all try to manipulate you beyond what it is in a normal family. And there's a lot of mixed emotions that are going on with these children. They love their dad. They've even loved the new mom, but that's taking time away from dad. Especially if we're single for a while with dad. Like I think Brian and I are similar in the sense that I was single for a number of years with my children. I didn't have custody of them, but I had them all the time, 2 or 3 days a week. And so they expected me to be there, and they expected me to be there, them to be my priority. And when I remarried, that became a challenge. They had this, oh my gosh, look on their face like, wait a minute, I have been replaced by this woman. And so, you just have to balance it all out. It's very difficult. And relative to the parenting, I had 4 children by a previous marriage, and then my wife had 1. And then of course we had 1 later, but living with him was with my stepson, who was 5 when we were married. again, he knew where the authority was, and that was with her. And I deferred to that. And I really think that's the best way to do it, is to defer to the biological parent. Personally, that's what I think. I didn't necessarily disagree. I came from a little different environment. With 4 kids is a lot different than 1, relative to what you will do or can afford to do with 1 that you can't afford to do with 4 or more. So there's a little bit of adjustment. But I really think deferring to biological parent is the best way to do it. And then if there's a real issue, that's discussed that in private. Still, I'm not sure it's worth the you choose your battles. When my daughter moved in, she was in 14, moved in with us. Then the dynamics of 2 came into big play, and I was working. I worked all day, and she stayed at home with the children. And so, but I found that created some. I don't want to take care of your crazy child type of thing. And so she basically said, you're going to have to take her to her doctor's appointments. You're going to have to take her to her ADD group, and I live 35 miles away from home. I worked 35 miles from home. So, and I just kind of had to accept that. And then it's been, maybe I should have done it initially, but I think that really helped, because I think you really have to pitch in you have to pitch in and try to make it work, but it's not easy. Let me tell you, it's not easy. And
yeah.
You just have to work at it and be willing to compromise, not morally, of course, but compromise in styles. There's all kinds of styles that work. So there you go.
Yeah, I do like the idea that you brought up of deferring to the biological parent. It's actually something that a therapist, and I've heard a couple of therapists recommend that as well, because when the biological parent is the one that is deemed a disciplinarian, especially in the first year, because there's a lot of transition time in that first year, when the biological parent is more the disciplinarian, then the new step parent or whoever that comes in can then be the fun one, or the one that's not the disciplinarian. So that could definitely be better. So I like that. And Jason, you had your hand up.
I do. My kids have interacted with a couple of young ladies I've dated. My girls told me they actually look forward to the day I get married.
Awesome.
So, yeah, they do. They're actually looking forward to it. I'm curious, when everybody says, "Oh, there's a huge transition, there's problems," and I like to plan ahead. And in my job as a district manager, 90% of my problems go away because I've already pre-planned the answers. I already know the answers to the question. So my question to those who have had these experiences, can you give me some actual instances or problems that you kind of seen happen across the board that I can kind of expect, or anybody listening can kind of expect to encounter, so that we can kind of plan ahead, so we don't have to have those problems. So I want to learn from your experience. So Fred, I defer to you, because you look, because you got more hair, not because you look older.
Yes.
Did you have a question?
Yes. What can you give me some actual things that are going to come up? Some actual examples of things that happen.
Are you talking to Fred or to me?
Anybody really, because what I'm looking at is, because I know one of the things I've always decided that when it comes to any kind of discipline or handling my children, that I would take care of that. The good cop, bad cop. I would be the bad cop, because it would put the other person in a unfair situation. But
yes,
I'm curious what other things can come up. So
I can tell you what we did when there was a single child in the home. But obviously we deferred. some things are basic that you understand, that you don't talk back and things like that. But even when we had my daughter in our home, I did never dispute her in front of my daughter, and rarely, if ever, would I undo anything she had done. Now we might have a discussion about it later, like, well, I think that was a little bit tougher on her, and I'm much more. I'm a guy, and that's okay. If the window's broken, we'll fix it, you know. But so well. The real challenge is what would some of the things example of some of the things you asked for examples. My daughter, we had a griddle to put on the stove to heat up for making pancakes or whatever. Well, my daughter put it on the stove and turned on the stove and walked off and left it, and it messed it up. So my wife said, "Well, you're going to buy a new one." She didn't just do that with my daughter. She did it with my stepson as well. When he lost his retainer the second time, she made him pay for it. And I'm much softer hearted than that. And so I remember thinking, oh my gosh, she's going to make her buy that new griddle, and it's really not that bad, you know, whatever. So that was and I never said anything to my daughter. My daughter ended up buying the new griddle. Other situations, my daughter was a challenge relative to, she had ADD. And she's turned out pretty good after all. Really good. And she, back in the day when she didn't make good grades. So that was not appropriate to not make good grades in our home. So there was a helpline. And so I was assigned by my wife to check on the hotline and follow up with her to make sure that she did her homework. Because, you know, you could call the hotline and to tell you what their homework was supposed to be. Then you would follow up with the child and see if it was done. It was my responsibility to do that. And so that, I mean, it created quite a conflict. Other than, as long as I was assigned to it, it was okay. I like strong women, and she was very strong, and I'm very strong, so I had to compromise sometimes. But again, that was really, I should have been doing that. But I tended to go, well, I got a lot of work to do. Will you take care of that? That didn't work.
No, that does not work. Yeah, so when it comes to different things, I would just say, I love Fred's examples, and it's great examples of day-to-day situations that could arise. I love that you Jason, that you say, you know, you would be the disciplinarian for your own children. That's awesome. But what discipline are you using? And are both of you okay with that? Because can she watch that, participate that, and support it, right? For instance, some people are okay with spanking, some people are not, right? Like, you just want to make sure that whatever discipline you're using, that it is. Having somebody pay for something they've messed up is a form of discipline. And as long as you're in agreement on that, that's awesome. You know, I would tend to do the same thing Fred's wife did. You know, you messed it up, that means you're going to pay for it, right? Because that's a responsible thing to do, even in adulthood. And, you know, generally you just want to, whatever it is that you want to do day to day, you want to make sure you're in agreement on the grade thing, on the school thing, on the extracurricular activities. Are you in agreement with that? The money you put into the kids, the kind of clothes you buy for the kids, the food you buy for the kids, the you know, vacations or the extra trips or whatever. Are you guys okay with that? Are you on board with the same thing when it comes to church, when it comes to expectations of, you know, kids when they're 8 years old, are they going to be baptized? Kids when they're, you know, boys when they're 12, are they going to, you know, are you just assuming all of this, right? Or do you know where she stands with everything? As far as church goes, as far as what they're going to do. I know a big conflict for my son and his wife in the beginning when they had Enzo was dinner time. And they lived it with me for a little bit until I went through the sale of my house and everything. And I remember telling them one night at dinner, I said, you know what? I love the fact that, you know, we can have family dinner together, but I am not going to sit here and listen to you threaten him all night over whether or not, or, nag him all night about what he eats for dinner. And that was my son doing that. So I could talk to my son that way. So I would not talk to Yanni like that. But to my son, I'm like, dude, let up already. It's causing tension for all of us, And, I would do that more away from Enzo too, just so that so TJ were going back and forth. I'd say it to both of them and be like, people, peace at the table. It's my house. This is my expectation. There's going to be peace at the table, right? So just different things, because there's little battles you can do, and then there's the big ones too. So mealtime expectations. Are you guys going to be eating family dinners together, or is it fast food through the drive-through on the way to ball practice? You know what I mean? Do you have pizza night 2 times a week, or is it homemade dinners every night? And are you expecting kids to help prepare those meals, or are you expecting to just serve them, right? So there's day-to-day type things. Chores, that's another thing. It can be a battle, or it can be a system that you set up that works. What are the chore expectations for the kids? And so it would come from an environment where his mom did everything for him. He was 11 years old. He didn't even know basic, kitchen skills or hand washing dishes or anything. So he comes to my house and now he's having to learn, which is fine. We teach him, right? But she was open to that, at least. She wasn't feeling like, oh, I've got to do it all for him. So now he started cooking for himself more, and he started doing more things for himself, and he was assigned chores and whatever. But again, they had to talk about that.
Can I say something?
Oh, go right ahead.
I think it's important that the children. I think I'm thinking of Jason here in a minute. You want to be the disciplinarian for your children, and if there's a joy. I think it's important that the children are all disciplined the same, because
yes.
So that may be the biggest challenge in the sense of for example, that example of buying the griddle, or I think it wouldn't have been fair for her to get away with it because Dad said, "I don't worry about the griddle." It wouldn't have been fair. It would create it would divide things up. So I think what we did, and I got to give my wife most the credit, was we're consistent. Even though sometimes we didn't agree, we would do it consistently. And she was more of a disciplinarian than I was. I'll give you another funny example. We had my son, my stepson, I call him my son. He's been with me since he was 5, and we had an episode where a neighbor called and said someone has set fire to our swinging bench chair, and they called on the phone and they saw somebody with blonde hair running away. And well, my daughter has blonde hair and my son has brunette. And so I immediately looked at my daughter. I said, "What?" And my stepson raised, it was me and Sean, him and his buddy accidentally set a bench on fire, right? Well, the result was that my wife was very strict about that. So we made him rebuild. We brought the chair to our house and we put new splats in it. So it looked almost like new. And so here again, she was always very much of, you're responsible. You fix what you break, which I think is good. And that was a good lesson for me as well, because as a dad with single kids would say, what do we call it? When you're not married, you have kids. Whatever you call that now, I forget. And so you tend to, especially if your children don't live with you, I tended to be a little lenient. Like, well, they're only with me for a few days a week. I'm going to let them get by with things I shouldn't. And so I think in a family, I tended to develop a habit of being a little too lenient because I didn't want to ruin my time with them punishing them. So that's just a thought.
Yeah. So let's talk about that just for a minute, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. I'm sure you are. It's a buzzword going around a lot, but how a lot of kids have this sense of entitlement, like they're entitled to certain things. Like your parents just don't say no. They're just giving them whatever they want whenever they want it. But something I learned early on when it came to teaching my kids and instructing them and disciplining, is that when you discipline a child, disciple is part of that word. And you're basically teaching them the right way to live with that discipline. If you are punishing, you're being punitive. You're putting them down. You're making them feel bad. You're they're going off more of fear or hate or anger, right? They're not really learning how to be from that situation. And so that helped me a lot in training my children, is remembering that I wasn't perfect at this, because trust me, there were times when they got it and I was angry. But for the most part, I did work really hard at trying to be more of a disciplinarian and trying to teach them how to be disciples of Christ, to walk the right way, to follow the right path, kind of thing, if you will. And a lot of times with our discipline, we're guiding them in the right way to do. That's why taking responsibility for actions is a very good guiding way to do things. It teaches them the right thing to do. When they have hurt somebody, you make it right, right? When you've done something wrong, you do something to make it right. And, somebody who burned a pan, spanking them, not going to help that pan, not going to bring it back. It's not going to replace it. It's not going to really teach them anything. Sorry, that you are in a way where you do compromise and that you are in agreement with that. And I hope that helps some, Jason, in answering your question. All right.
Paula, can I say something? I'll take that as yes. Jason, one of the things that I wanted to share with you is I think it's real important to talk about a lot of things on how you guys are going to discipline in your home, how you're going to set that consistency up. I know you like to plan ahead and plan for that. I promise you, you're not going to be able to plan ahead for everything because kids are so unexpected. I never thought I'd have to deal with some of the things I had to deal with my kids, much less with a step parent involved. I never thought I'd deal with the things that I had to deal with a stepson. But I think the most important thing is consistency and having a way planned out with your next spouse that you guys can talk about it in a safe way so that you feel like you are heard and that your children are being treated fairly amongst all the way across. There's got to be a platform put into place that for a loving, caring compromise, you know what I'm saying? That's the thing that I feel like you need to set up more than knowing what to expect. How to resolve whatever comes up is more important than knowing exactly what to do in every situation. My opinion. I just wanted to share that with you.
Jennifer, that was beautiful, because this is one thing where I don't have any experience and I have to defer to those who do. I've been divorced, it's coming up for 5 years now. So I've only been married the one time. My ex-wife is still, she's still single. So there's a lot of things that I don't know. I do look forward to being remarried sooner rather than later. And so there's a lot of things I don't know. I know statistically speaking that you have a higher percentage of divorces on a second marriage than you do on a first or a third one. And so, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about anybody, but y'all, that's my Southern in me, y'all have experiences where I don't. And if I can use those experiences to benefit me so I'm not a statistic and my kids don't have that negative experience, hey, thank you, all of y'all. This is awesome. This is awesome for me. I know I'm I'm here, but this is awesome for me. So I want to say thank you. So thanks, Jennifer and Fred, Paula.
Actually, if I can jump in here real quick. What I did, I've been divorced twice. I have a child from my first marriage. And it really came down to, in those day-to-day situations, that sometimes I had to take a time out. We had to take a time out, sent my kid to his room or whatever, and we discussed what the issue was, what made him act out the way he did. His father doesn't really set rules, boundaries, and limitations, and I am completely different. There are rules and he will follow them. It's kind of how it works in my house. But sometimes we had to have the discussion of what the appropriate disciplination would be, whether it be losing screen time, losing privileges, whatever that is. So sometimes, yeah, you do have to take a time out, look at the situation, and discuss because you want both partners to be in agreement. But I disciplined my son, but to make sure that there was follow through, it helped when, especially in my second marriage, that we discussed, and this is what's going to happen, because I was working outside the house and my second husband was stay-at-home dad. So what I said had to go when I wasn't home.
Okay, great. Thanks for those thoughts. I appreciate that. Do you have somebody with a question? It says, how do you address an extremely active young boy? Anybody have any? I had one of those. I'm happy to offer some suggestions, but does anyone else want to answer that? So, if you do,
how old's the? I would ask how old the boy is, and
yeah.
when you say active, what do you mean
Chris,
by active?
how old is the boy? I don't know. All right, so
I have a comment if I can add another one.
okay.
When I was single with my children, I did, I took them to a lot of, my children didn't live with me, but I was with, like I said, a lot. I handled a lot of their doctor's appointments, dental appointments, things like that. I always attended their sporting events. I can't imagine ever missing one. So, I mean, I think it's really important. This is not after, this is as a single dad. So I think it's really important that connection, that they have to be a priority in your life, in my opinion, even, at equal to work or better or more. I'd take off time during work to go take them to dental, things like that, because their mother had to work. And so I just think it's really important. You really try to maintain that good relationship with your children. And I feel like it's paid off throughout my children's lives that we're still very close. All of us are. But anyway, just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, I didn't have an extremely active boy, but Sharon was a very active girl, and she was very, very smart. And she would, if you don't give them some direction and some discipline as far as where to go with things, they will figure out things to do themselves. So I tried, and I was working full time, so it was kind of hard, but I tried to get her involved in organizations and wholesome groups to give her those contacts and those kinds of things. I think a boy is a little different because girls are more social and guys like to do things with their hands and work with things. And so it sometimes takes more hands-on things for that. But I didn't have a boy, but that's what I tried to do to help. And then tried to show them things to enjoy their inquisitiveness and their acting without panicking too much. I mean, they would, my husband used to take cars apart in our backyard just to let the boys in the neighborhood come over and take cars apart. And then he'd put them back together, and then the parents would come over and say they got all dirty. Well, that's what boys do. But I don't know what to do necessarily to help a very active sportsman kind of boy, what to do on that part. But maybe the same kind of concept, just find them something active to do, and that's constructive, and don't let them rely on their own resources, because I think that's really dangerous, in my opinion.
Okay,
I've always been with the belief that you have to participate in something. You can't come home and do nothing. You have to participate in sports or some kind of activity. It's not like it's okay to come home and do nothing and watch TV. You have to participate in something after school, a club or you know, my boys are in sports most seasons, and I think that's a key, because they will find what they want to do, and what you want probably.
Yeah, Fred brings up a really great point. I want to share with you an experience I had, and then we'll talk about the group thing too with the boy. So one of my sons is now 21. And when he was 4, he was diagnosed with ADHD and ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. It's like a teenager at 4 years old. And then when he was 5, he was diagnosed with a brain malformation called Arnold-Chiari. He was 7, he was diagnosed with Asperger's. At 9 years old was when his father and I divorced, separated, whatever. Anyway, so he was always deemed our problem child. He was a behavior problem, textbook behavior problem. He actually had somebody in primary called to be his shadow. That was their calling, just to sit by him and make sure he got through primary for 2 hours every week. He had 2, maybe 3 people during a year and a half, 2 years that we were there. And even his preschool teacher told me she thought he was possessed because he was out of control. Now, none of my other kids were this way. But what I learned from that is, his name is Matthew, and Matthew helped me to become a better mom, because I parented very authoritatively before Matthew. It was, you know, by the book. It was my way or it's wrong. We had very rules. There was a lot of order, a lot of strictness, and whatever. Well, I had to become a little bit more laid back, and I actually took parenting classes to learn how to parent Matthew. And I thought, well, if this is going to help Matthew, I can do this with all of my children, not just him. And so I did. I stopped yelling. The anger went out. Like right now, it's hard for me to yell now. I mean, I'm okay with getting attention in a room, like if I've got to, you know, break through some chatter or whatever. But to just get angry with somebody and just yell, I can't do it. I retrained how I thought and my mindset toward it. I've learned that kids, when they're out of control, so are the parents. I didn't know how to parent that kid, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was just winging it. And thankfully with my other kids, they just kind of went along with it. But I had to learn how to parent more constructively and in a more loving, a more calm way. When Matthew was about 11, 2 years after his father and I had separated, I remember, and I would do this often with my kids and just bringing them into my room, and we'd have a little chat, we'd talk and catch up and whatever. But I remember one time I had him in my room and I said, Matthew, I do not understand why you feel like it's okay to act the way that you act. You're such a good boy. And I just don't get it. And he looked at me
like I had two heads. I will never forget this. He said, Mom, I'm not good. He said, you know, I'm not gonna be good. And what I had learned was that we labeled him the problem child. We labeled him the pain in the butt. We labeled him the hyper kid. We labeled him whatever. And he became what we labeled him. He was not going to make a liar out of us. And that's something I've learned about kids. They become what we tell them that they are. So I changed my label for Matthew after that day. And everybody that knows him now, 10 years later, would never believe that he was ever a problem child. But I changed what I told him that he was. And from that day forward, I never told him, about never, I'm sure I let it slip a time or two, but I made a conscious effort to never tell him again he's a pain in the butt, or that, you know, he was a problem, or that he was a whatever label we were giving him. To the point that I started saying more things like, I am so glad you're my son. You are such a blessing in my life. You are such a good son. I am so grateful for you. And it's amazing to me how in just a short time, his behavior started changing. So for some people, now he's got neurological issues, not knocking that one, but he is so high functioning now that he can live completely on his own. Exactly it, Mary. I spoke with love. And it was something that, for me, I had to learn how to parent differently. And my other kids benefited from that. Now I not only give the Lord the credit, but of all my children, I give Matthew the credit for helping me to be the woman and the mother that I became. Because I did have to think about it differently. I had to parent differently. And so I did that with my other kids as well. So my suggestion to you in raising a kid that may seem a little out of control is be consistent with how you interact with him, how you discipline him, if you will. I'm not saying that Matthew never did anything wrong again, because he did, but the anger and the hostility is gone. And I was able to just go to him and say, Matthew, I love you. You are such a good person. So whenever he would get angry or feel like things were out of control for him, I would just go to him in a calm way and approach him that way, and it would bring him down. So, you know, now we have other coping ways too, but that was one way that we did it then. So that would be my suggestion to you, is change your label of him and make sure that you're consistent with your discipline and consistency with them. And I love Fred's suggestion of you getting a boy, girl too, but especially a boy. A teenage boy needs a gang to belong to. There can be good gangs and not so great gangs, right? That's why Boy Scouts was so successful for so long, because it got them all together as a team, as a group, as a troop, if you will, and being able to work it. Now, you know, through the last few years, that's all changed and whatever, and I get that. But I know that's something that helped my boys, is being in Boy Scouts. We were a Boy Scout family. I knew more about Boy Scouts than his Scout leaders did. Their Scout leaders would come to me for suggestions on whatever, because I studied it so much, and that was even part of my internship. I love Boy Scouts, and that was an amazing thing. But other great groups or gangs to belong in is band, chorus, sports teams, like was suggested. When you've got a good coach that is kind of like a second parent, if you will, or another heavy positive influence in their life, that's huge. But I will tell you, as they enter teenage years, especially 14 and up, it doesn't matter so much what the parents or their adult leaders feel. It matters more what their peers feel. They're going to try to impress their peers more than they're going to try to impress their parents. And that's just nature of boys. That was my specialty. And when I went and got my degree, I did a youth leadership, and I specialized in teenage boys. I had 4 of them, and I wanted to figure them out a little bit. And I needed to learn about the mask. I needed to learn about the ego. I needed to learn about whatever else. And that was something that I learned. And Pat, you've got a question for us. What's your question?
Not really so much a question. Experience with my own family, not my personal experience, but my brother. My oldest brother has a bunch of kids. He and his wife had 8 kids together, and she died early. So here he is, 40, I think 42 years old, with 8 kids. The oldest, a senior in high school, the youngest, 3. And, he didn't know what to do, with himself. Long story short, he got together with a gal. He got her baptized, so she didn't have background in the church. They actually married in the temple, which was a good thing, but there was wild inconsistencies with the way his kids and her kids were treated. And as a result, this sounds way too dramatic, but he lost his kids. As they graduated, they moved west. One after the other, after the other, after the other. There's no estrangement, but they aren't here anymore. So as you blend those families, it is so important that you're on the same page and treat those kids equally. There was definitely some favoritism, and his kids saw that, and they said, why are we even trying to do the right thing or be good? We just need to get out of here. And they did. It was a heartbreaking situation. I mean, they're a good bunch of kids, and most of them, maybe all of them, are married in the temple now. I mean, so the base groundwork was laid, but there were some really difficult years in there.
Well, yeah, definitely. So that goes back, I think, to, was it Fred's point of making sure that the discipline is the same for all kids, that you're on the same page. Great example of that, Paul. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Any other questions or any other comments you guys would like to make?
Well, one comment I wanted to make was that a lot of times they're testing to see if you really do care about them as a step parent. And that's something that you got to kind of prove yourself. So, for instance, Sharon wanted to go to see an R-rated movie. I think it was like a Chainsaw Massacre movie. I mean, it was really a gruesome thing that was, you don't need to have that in your head, right? And she's 15, 16-year-old and had enough problems without having that going through your head in a photo. So I said, no, you can't go. And my husband, she asked me first, and then my husband supported me on that. So then what she learned to discipline compared to punishment is that she then proceeded while I was at work to clean the whole house. I mean, immaculate. And I came home and the house was spotless, and I was so pleased. And I told her, well, we need to go do something special to celebrate now that I have all this free time. And she wanted to go see this movie. And I had to sit down and explain to her, the reason I don't want you to see the movie is not because I'm in charge. It's because it's not good for you. And you don't need to see that, not because I have the right to tell you what to do. And I think that was a big transition point between me and Sharon, for her to realize that I wasn't doing it just to be the queen of the house. I was doing it because it wasn't good for her. And so they're going to test you in different ways for something. But I think back with my husband's first wife, that it was more punishment kind of thing. It was like, because I said so, and then if you do something nice for you, well, okay, then you can go. Well, there's no concern for her that it's for her own good. So if she could convince me that it was good for her, for some, or she could handle it or something like that, we'd have a discussion. But if I didn't think it was good for her, that's what I was basing my decisions on. So I think that makes a big difference for them. But it's going to take a time. They're not going to immediately assume that. They're going to assume that you're in the way.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for bringing that up. All right. Anybody else have any other comments or questions or anything like
Hey,
that?
Paula, I'd like to say something. I don't really kind of feel left out of the conversation just because I've never been married. So I haven't had to try to blend the family. I've been a product of trying to blend families, and I can share or testify and share that I have been a product of being treated differently from the children, from the other parents' children. And it was the hand of my own mother. She expected more out of me than she did them and showed them more compassion. So I grew up thinking, there's something inherently wrong with me because I'm being treated differently. And so as a 40-year-old woman, I'm still in therapy trying to get over the fact that I feel like I'm not good enough. So it does affect us. It does affect the children in enormous ways. So as parenting as a single parent, never married, has been very trying, very hard. Everything lies on me. They look at and they see me and only me. And I'm that example. I have a good communication with one of their fathers and I don't with the other one. So there's a difference there. But I never thought until we started talking, I never really considered what would that be like for me, because mine are pretty much grown. Corinne is 18, about to start college, and my son's 16 and in high school. So I've never really considered how would I be as a step parent, and I just never thought about that kind of stuff, about what I would need to consider or the conversations that I would need to have with maybe a man that comes into my life that already has kids, and maybe they're younger and they still need to be raised. So this is very interesting, and I don't really know. I don't know. And then to consider adult children, like how adult children will come into that. I've raised them on my own, and they have always been my number one priority. And it is going to be very hard, even when they're grown, to not allow them to always be my number one priority, even if they're adults. Like I feel like that's going to be a very, very big challenge for me.
I can still be your number one.
So
I don't mind that.
This is my daughter, Corinne. She's the one that's going to want me to drop everything no matter what when she calls.
Period. I would do the same for you.
So anyway, just some interesting thoughts from my perspective, and some things maybe for the men to consider, that if they start dating a woman who has never been married and doesn't have that experience of co-parenting at all. Not that I don't think I would be good at it, but just something for them to consider. And maybe from their perspective, the male's perspective, what do they think about that, about possibly dating a woman who has kids, raised kids, but has never been married? What are some expectations? What are some things that I should be doing to prepare for that possibility of having a man in my life that has kids that still need, like, that might actually be in the home? Because I don't plan on bringing mine with me. So I hope they out the house.
All right, so I think we've got some men in here I know that are that still have kids at home, like Jason or Brian. You guys want to answer that?
Brian, I haven't heard your melodious voice tonight.
I did chip in a little bit at the beginning, but
I missed it.
honestly, it's a struggle for me with my kids, trying to get them to do everything. Once they hit teenagerhood, I was like, oh, now I don't know what I'm doing. So I wish I had good answers for everybody, but it's a daily struggle for me. to find what they need. You know, and as far as blending, I mean, really you kind of have to have a united front and consistency, you know, between, you know, both partners in the marriage. But other than that, yeah, with my kids, it's 3 different kids, 3 different parenting styles, and it's trying to juggle them all the time.
To your question, Heidi, I thought you had a pet raccoon there for a second. When I looked down, I saw your dog. For a brief second, I thought it was a raccoon. But one of the things I've learned is coming from a marriage and having that marital experience versus somebody who hasn't been married is that the person you marry is going to have experience that they should be able to kind of sit down and, you know, talk about finances. One thing that I know for me that I want to do is keep the 3 bank accounts, his, hers, and then ours. The his being, you know, my personal account to spend money, you know, that I want to buy stupid things with, and hers for whatever she feels there's, you know, she wants to buy. So you don't have that argument, and then you have the ours where you pay the bills. But going into somebody, there's just co-parenting, sharing responsibilities, sharing financial burdens, purchasing, decisions. There's a lot because you're probably used to doing everything by yourself, making all those decisions. And so you're going from, you know, you decide what you're going to have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner to what would you do? And so there's going to be a lot of conversations as far as ways to kind of change that, not direction or ideas, just kind of incorporate their experience in a relationship to help you kind of better transition to being in a relationship. It's a long conversation. I've had it actually. So Pat, I'm just saying hi. So I'm trying to think of some things we talked about. We talked about co-parenting children. We talked about finances. We talked about, because I've had different experiences than this one friend of mine has, and so she has never been married, and so it was easy kind of for me because I'm used to having those. I guess you'd probably be easier now that I think about it because you don't have those things that you're kind of carrying with you, so it's easier for you to kind of make the transition because you don't have any kind of prior experience. So it'd probably be a bonus from my perspective. So I didn't answer your question because it's something you have to take up with each individual, but because you don't have any kind of preconceived notions or things that you want to kind of incorporate from your previous marriage to your new marriage, it'd probably make it easier for you to transition into that marriage, into that relationship, because it'll be new for you. So that's a good thing.
Awesome. Hope that helped, Heidi. Yeah, I agree that, you know, it's all different with different people. We have different perspectives, different backgrounds, different life experiences. It is just amazing how we integrate all of that in trying to come together as a couple, and then we make it work however that we can, right? So with those life experiences and those perspectives and experiences and whatever that we're going to be bringing in. So when we met 2 different backgrounds and 2 different opinions or 2 different whatever, we hope that we find some common ground. That is the most important. And Heidi, I know I've heard a lot of men say that they would totally accept somebody who's never been married, with or without children. That's generally not so much of an issue as much as just making sure that you're all on the same page with everything else. I know that the people that do come into singlehood with the big long, well, I'm not going to marry anybody with this, and I'm not going to marry anybody like that, and I'm not going to marry whatever, you end up not getting married most of the time. Or if they do, they're not going to be very happy. And I'm not saying that that's that way across the board, but and I don't mean that in a bad way. Like you definitely want what you do want, right? But I've heard people be very extreme
And I'm not going to marry somebody who's a widow. I'm not going to marry somebody who's never been married. I'm not going to marry somebody with more than 2 kids. I'm not going to marry somebody that I have any conflict with. Literally, I've heard that from 2 men. First sign of conflict, it's over. I'm done. And I'm like, you do realize you're not going to stay married then, because there's going to be conflict at some point. How you handle it is going to determine the path of your marriage and the journey that your marriage takes and the relationship you're going to be in. But it's more important how you handle the conflict, not thinking naively that you're not going to have any conflict. Okay. So just keep that in mind when it comes to that. I mean, there have been people that I have not dated or that have chosen not to date me because I can no longer have children. And even if I could, I'm done, you know. and then there are those that will be like, 5 kids is too many kids. And I heard that a lot. I know that there is a lot to, you know, the never married, the widow, the divorced, whatever, in the church. They all have pros and cons. Nobody's perfect, right? We've all got a story. We've all got a history of some kind, and we've all made mistakes. And when we can accept that of ourselves and accept that of other people, you will go forward with much healthier relationships and much healthier parenting experiences. I never would have expected that my oldest son would date or marry somebody who had a kid. It just wasn't really something we really talked about. It wasn't something that I was opposed to. But what I learned as he got older was that he tended to date more women that had children. Some of them had never been married. The woman my son is married to now had never been married before, and she had an 11-year-old son. And he was okay with that. In Brazil, things are a little different. You know, in America, things are different too. But she wasn't a member of the church. And, or even if people say, go and active for a while or whatever, there were just different experiences that people go through in life. We all have a different journey. It's where we are at now and the path that we're on and the journey ahead of us, not what's behind us. Remember Lot's wife. What did the Lord tell her? Don't look back. There is no purpose in looking back. But we plan for the future. So when we plan for the future in our parenting or in our relationships, we've got to know what our expectations are. I found out last week my 21-year-old son, who on Vespers, does not like the word expectations. So I had to come up with a different word. I think suggestions was the word that we came up with that he liked better. So suggestions or expectations that you have in a relationship, right? So it is really good for you just to kind of know general expectations. I want somebody that's going to be okay with my 5 kids. I'm looking for a man who's going to be able to be an example of a father figure to my sons and also to my daughter, who will be able to be there. They're not going to have to change diapers of my children or, you know, do Little League or whatever. I've got grandkids ahead, but I don't have children in my home that, you know. And so for me, my perspective is a little different than, say, those of you that still have children at home. It is a lot different. When, you know, I've been single for 12 years. So even when I did have kids at home, my perspective was different in dating, and now it's different in dating now when my kids are grown. So again, I think it's just perspective, life experiences, and the journey that we're on, where we're at presently, and what we're doing with our own personal development and our own relationship with the Lord and our own relationship with our children. And how is their attitude toward inviting someone else into your home or into your family, and someone else with children. What do you have? Do you have family discussions about that? What are their thoughts and feelings about that? I had found that through the 12 years of me raising my kids, that they all did change and evolve with their attitude. My youngest was 7 when everything happened. And his attitude at the time was, I'm not going to be baptized until I have a new dad. And I was like, wait a minute. That might take a little bit. And thankfully we were able to get through that. And his oldest brother did baptize him. I think I've shared that story before. But it is something where, and then it went from that to a few years after that saying, Mom, I think we're okay the way we are. I don't think we need anybody else. And I'm like, I don't think you really realize what you're missing out on without a dad. He's like, nope, I'm good. I've got my scout leaders. I've got, this teacher. I've got whatever. I'm good, right? And I think he was afraid of the same situation again or something similar. And then through the years, it's all evolved. And now all of my kids are like, okay, when is Mom getting ready to spend long enough? So, it's just been kind of different how that has gone on. But have discussions about it. Stay open about it. Make sure that you're teaching them an openness about embracing the possibilities. And then you want to be mindful of and prayerful of when you introduce them to the other person. I don't think there's a right or wrong or a certain time or whatever. It's just what feels right to you. Even with your adult children, it's when it feels right to you. I have a friend in a dating situation now, but they're going to, go about it in a certain way so that they know the timing of that. All right, any other questions, comments, anything like that?
Hey, Paula, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Syra.
Hey.
Hey, I just had a thought that I apologize, I'm on the road right now, but I'm listening to you guys and stuff. I think that from the things that I've heard, I think that sometimes I don't think we give our kids enough credit for being smarter. Because my kids, when my ex disappeared out of the picture 11 years ago, my son was 4 and my daughter was a baby. So she doesn't even know her father, and I kept thinking that they were going to have this huge gap in their lives and that they would be damaged and all this other stuff. And so from the very beginning, I never talked bad about my ex, but I always talked very direct with them. I talked to them like I felt like that they would understand, because they step up to the plate, and there was one time that I'm going to have to reveal something it was a really nasty situation, but in order to explain, I have to tell you about this. But my ex wanted to split my kids up. And he wanted me to take my daughter and he wanted to take my son because he had a bond with my son. And I said no. And I had been talking to somebody else in another situation, a friend or something. And up till then, I've been very, very careful, never, ever to bring that up, in any conversations. But my daughter overheard it. And I was horrified, that she had overheard it. I mean, I was near tears thinking, oh my gosh, I've just ruined her because she's going to think that her father didn't want her and she's going to think what's wrong with her and all this sort of stuff. And she just looks at me. She goes, I don't know him. I don't care. It's fine. I'm okay, Mom. And I think that that's where if we are really straight and honest with our children and give them the credit that they're smart enough to understand, even when they're little, we don't have to make it complicated when we explain. But they really are just intelligent little adults, and my kids are happy and healthy. And granted, it's not all me. I have a little village helping me, to raise my kids. But I think it's one of the most advantageous things that we can do is to give them more credit for what they can handle. And it helps them to step up to the plate to feel like they want to handle more,
Yep.
And the other thing I just want to mention that Sister Oakes, Kristen Oakes has a book I want to suggest. She wrote it. It's called The Single Voice, and it's basically the unexpected life is no less a life. I highly recommend that book to anybody that's single, that's, you know, divorced, widowed, never been married, because she went through it herself, and she's got some incredible wisdom.
Yep, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and two, just keep in mind, I love what Paula, you know, about how kids, that they are resilient, thankfully. I know, you know, it is tough when, you know, kids are in that situation, but it is really something to me how, even though my kids grew up basically fatherless, they, it's amazing to me their attitude toward being a husband and father has, how it is now. It's almost accentuated because of that, and because of the way that we were able to talk about it and discuss that role, so they could plan for that. So I also want to let you know, or give you an example, that my oldest son was 5 at the time when I met my last husband. And my daughter was 3, and I think Jeremy was 1.5, something like that. And we met, and he proposed to me, and we were planning to get married and whatever. And TJ one time came to me, he was 5, and he said, "Do you have to marry him?" And I said, "Well, baby, no, I don't have to marry him." He said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I don't really like him." And I'm like, "Well, do you know why you don't like him?" And he couldn't really tell me. You know, TJ's not really a talker. If I had Chris, that might be different, but TJ's just not really a talker. And he just couldn't come up with anything, except he said, "I like the last guy you dated better. The last guy I dated would actually go out and play ball with him and do other things with him, whereas the guy that was engaged to was not." And looking back now, I realized that kids have an intuition that I didn't even know about. I wish now I had at least waited to figure out more of what it was, you know, that wasn't right there, instead of blowing it off as though you're 5 and, you know, it'll be okay. It'll all work out. And because he had an intuition that I had no clue about. So that's something too. I know when it comes to teenagers, it's a little different, because teenagers can, you know, if you've got a teenager that's a challenge before you're dating somebody, it's not going to change after generally. But teenagers are just fun people anyway. Actually, they're some of my favorite people. When I've been a substitute teacher, I always wanted to substitute high school. They are my favorite people to be around. I love being able to have discussions with them and that kind of thing. But in blending a family and them coming into, you know, their home and their personal space, it is different. That needs to be taken into account and given some time to have them adapt. So those are my thoughts for tonight. Do you guys have any other thoughts or comments or questions you want to talk about? I think you guys are awesome.
I just wanted to say.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say thank you to Jason and Brian for their input on that. And Jason, you bring out a really good point for me. I am used to doing everything on my own, and so it's going to be very hard. I think that's going to be a challenge. It's not that I don't want to, but it is going to be a challenge of me to consider another person in my daily thoughts and my routines and things like that. And so I am used to doing everything by myself. I've done it all, and I have not dated in 13 years. So just this last year I started dating again. So it's been quite a challenge, I will say that. But thank you so much for y'all's input. I appreciate it.
Well, that is something that you bring up that we're going to talk about on another webinar, and that is when we are kind of used to doing things on our own. You know, a lot of us have been single a long time. Like I've been single 12 years. I know of other friends that have been single 20 years or whatever. So some of us have been single and on our own a lot and had to do it all on our own. I've had to raise kids by myself. I think Jennifer raised kids by herself. We've had Lori, who's been on our calls before, raised kids by herself. So there's been a lot of us that are raising fatherless children. And to be able to come in, to have somebody come in to, you know, blend into that is kind of an exciting thought for us, but also can be there with its challenges. So, so you won't be the only one, Heidi, even though I know that you raised your kids all on your own. There are other people who have, you know, been in similar situations where they've been single a long time and still did it all on their own, whatever. So awesome. My hat's off to you. You're an awesome woman. You guys are all great. I really appreciate you sharing your Sunday evening with me and bearing with me through my internet glitches. So hopefully next week our internet will be back on and I won't have to be on my phone. That will be even more awesome. For now, I'm going to say good night. And next week, we are going to be at our conference. We will be doing a live panel during a lunch at our conference. And I've already got the panelists set up for that, which I'm excited about. And then we will be joining you on Sunday night. I've been tossing around a couple of different topics for next Sunday, but for now we may go forward with the money topic, or we might just get into recreation. I'm kind of thinking more recreation after a conference. That's where my mind's going to be, I'm sure. So then we can talk about that a little bit more next week. How to incorporate fun into relationships. All right. Good night. Talk to you later. Bye.